Anyone need a lesson for this morning? Okay, good. Oh, Betty. You're welcome. Okay, open your Bible to Acts chapter 27. Acts chapter 27. Committed to the gospel. One time a preacher preached about commitment and sacrifice. And they were next to a farm. And the pig and the hen heard the sermon. And across the street, there was an advertisement. I think it was for Denny's. It was ham and eggs. And the hen said, "That sign reminds me of that sermon. And for me, that's a real commitment. I keep providing eggs for their breakfast." And the pig said, "Well, for you it might be commitment. For me, it's a real sacrifice." Here we are today in 2023, far removed from when this book was written by Dr. Luke. And during this time period, Christians were being thrown and fed to the lions and persecuted severely. And so they had to be committed to the gospel. Obviously they were. The gospel survived. You and I, question number one, you and I are called to preach the gospel in difficult places and difficult circumstances. Our key verse comes from the end, chapter 28. Paul dwelt 2 whole years in his own hired house and received all that came in unto him, preaching the kingdom of God. So Paul was under house arrest while he was waiting for his case to come up. The courts were backlogged. Sort of sounds like today, doesn't it? You know, people, sometimes you'll hear on the news and it'll say, so-and-so was charged with a crime and they'll have to go to court in March of 24. You know? That's if everything goes smoothly. And so Paul was able to rent a house, but while he was in this place, he was still chained to a ball, and he, couldn't leave the house. He had 4 guards every day that watched over him, and so it was not an easy thing. Today we want to recognize, as we look at his voyage there, recognize God's grace in Paul's voyage, the grace of God. God had a plan. Last Sunday I preached on God has a plan. Remember Jeremiah 20:11? God has a plan for you. God had a plan for Paul. Paul was told by the Lord that he would preach the gospel to kings and queens and emperors, and he had that promise, and the grace of God was there. And trust God to give you protection when you are called to preach, to teach, to speak for the Lord. Always be bold. Always be a bold witness, whether easy or difficult situations. There are some times that it naturally is easy to talk to someone about the Lord. Okay? Something comes up and it naturally falls right into it. You remember when we all had standard cars? Remember that? And so when you were shifting, the other day I saw on Facebook these two guys, they stole a car. Well, they tried to. When they get in, the car was a standard, and you could hear the guys there going, "What was this? What's this?" And how to make it go? How do we? And so they get out and walked away. Okay, and so you've all seen or heard. Maybe it was you trying to shift those gears, and the car not going anywhere. And so things go smoothly. Sometimes they don't go so smoothly, but still be a bold witness. So think about Paul traveling from Jerusalem to Rome. If you've read through today's lesson, or maybe think about this after we've talked for a while, some of the things that Paul had to endure. And it's not just Paul. There are three people that are on this journey with him: Paul, Luke, and Aristarchus. Okay? So the three of them. Question number 2. After being falsely accused, Paul appealed to Caesar. Now, just on the surface, okay, none of us like being falsely accused, right? Right? None of us like that, and it doesn't matter what it is. We're playing a game, okay? If someone says you're cheating, and you're not cheating, you're just very good at it, all right? You don't like being accused falsely. Maybe it could be at work, it could be at play. I remember one time Beth was shopping at Penny's, and so she found a deal and took it up the cash register, and the item was a lot more than what it was on a sale rack, like for $9.99, and it was still like $50 or something like that. And so she said, "Well, I got it off that rack." And, "Oh, well, you know what happened was somebody took it off this rack and they put it on that rack." All right. I heard one time somebody, they took something up the counter and there was a line through it, and it was like $9.99, the new price, and the person, the clerk says, "Yeah, maybe you put that line in it. Maybe you did that." Well, none of us like being falsely accused of something. And every Roman citizen had the right to appeal to Caesar. They, just like today, if you're accused of something and you go to court and they find you guilty, you have the right to appeal. All right? And so they all had the right. Paul recognized he would never get a fair trial in Judah. Remember last week, the mob and the centurion pulled him out and rescued him, and it was accusations. Paul was stirring up sedition, and he recognized that it's not going to be fair. They're not going to listen to him, and they were so angry that Paul felt he had to appeal to Caesar. And question number 3. Now we have Paul's voyage to Rome, traveling as a prisoner. So if you have your Bible open, today's lesson is not a lesson in geography, okay? I almost took and put a map up here of where he was sailing around, but that would be taken away from the point. The point is, go back to question number 1, the grace of God through this whole voyage. All right? So verse number 1, when it was decided we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia. We put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. And Paul's there, and Luke is writing this, so there are the three of them, remember? The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so they might provide for his needs. Now think about that statement for just a moment, okay? Julius, the imperial regiment, right from Rome, one of the top soldiers in the Roman army. He's in charge of these prisoners. Paul was not the only prisoner that was on his way to Rome, okay? So what they would do is they would pick up prisoners along the way when they came to a port. Let's say they come into Sidon, okay? The imperial Julius would go to the commander of the fort there, and he would say, are there any more prisoners going for Rome? Okay? And so they would, yeah, we've got 2 or 3. And so they would add them to the group. The next port they came to, he would go to the fort. Any prisoners going to Rome? Yeah, we've got 5 this time. So they would keep adding to that number as they were going towards Rome. Luke and Aristarchus were with him. They will go to Sidon. Now, think about this. Paul's a prisoner on his way to Rome, yet Julius allows him to go off the ship and to go to his friends in Sidon while they're in port. While they're in port, they're going to be there. It was not just a prisoner ship, okay? These were merchant vessels. So when they landed in Sidon, they would be taking off cargo, okay, into the port, and then they would be getting more cargo onto the ship. So that would be several days for this to happen. And so in the meantime, Julius lets Paul go to his friends. So when he lands, I'm sure that, his friends there inside, and they must have got an email from him to know that he was in town, right? No. Dr. Luke, what? Pigeon. And I'm sure that Dr. Luke and Aristarchus, they went to the friends and said, Paul's here for a few days. And so Julius, today, can you imagine if you were under arrest and you were being taken to Los Angeles, and the train that you were on stopped in New York City? Can you imagine the sheriff that's taking you out there just letting you go into the city for a few days until the train's ready to go again? Can you imagine them doing that? But he had favor with this captain. And these people provided Paul with personal comforts such as clothing and other needs for the voyage, probably some deodorant, maybe a few snacks. On board the ship, he was not going to be first-class meals and things, right? It's going to be a long voyage, months, okay? Imagine if you had to take with you a month's supply of things that you're going to need, okay? Imagine that. And here, so these people they blessed Paul with these comforts. Question number 4. Now, the winds dictated their route. Okay? I'm just going to make this stuff up. If you were going to go to Lewiston today, okay? If you were going to go to Lewiston, you would not want to go to Biddeford, then to Standish, then to North Sebago, then to South Paris, and then over to Lewiston, right? Why would you not want to do that? It's too long. If you're going to go to Lewiston, you just want to go over here to the turnpike and jump on, and it's 30 miles. You go the other way, you're looking at like 65 miles to go all the way around there. However, remember, they are in sailing ships. And at this time of the year, the winds, 99% of the time, they blew in a certain direction. It's real hard taking a ship, making it go the opposite direction that the wind's blowing. Okay? That's really, and very large ships, that's really, it's even worse. So the way the winds were blowing, they couldn't go a direct route. They'd have to go around that way. So that's what's going on. They journeyed north of the island of Cyprus. Now, one of the things, and this is why I've included a lot of these cities' names, okay? You might be, when I'm talking all these cities' names, your eyes might start rolling in the back of your head. Where are these places? I don't know where these places are. And what difference does it make? What it does, it shows the validity of the document that we are reading. For example, if I said to you today that yesterday I drove directly to Old Orchard Beach, and along the way we stopped in Bangor for lunch. Okay? And then, after that, it was a long ride, and so we decided that we would get ice cream in Montreal. Okay, now, some of you are laughing, okay? Because you know we would not have made it to Old Orchard taking that route, right? Those cities are not along the way. So when we read this and it shows and it names the cities and towns along the way, and when he says that we had favorable winds, anybody in that era, they would know that what they were reading was true. It's like my great-grandfather, George Wilcox, one time he visited Portland, okay? And on the way back from Portland to northern Maine, he didn't like it that he had to pay the toll on 95. He didn't like that very much. Okay, now, anybody that's lived around here for a little while, what's the problem with that statement? What's that? There wasn't a turnpike back when he would have tried. It would have been, what, the Haynesville Woods, right? Old Route 1. There was no turnpike. You know, it's like someone wrote a book about northern Maine, and they wrote about the history of the church in northern Maine, churches in northern Maine, and they said in this book, they said camp meeting was just a wonderful time of the year, and they said that during camp meeting, there would be 6,000 cars parked at camp. There were so many people there were more than 6,000 cars. Well, I'll tell you this, if there were 6,000 cars, you could take them all the way from Washburn to Holton to line up, okay? And there wouldn't be enough room, there wouldn't be enough places to park 6,000 cars, all right? Now, the tabernacle did hold 1,200 people, including behind the platform. But there's no way you put 6,000 people in there, okay? So that person was what we sometimes call evangelistically writing, okay? So then past the region of Cilicia and Pamphylia to the city of Myrna. They boarded a ship from Alexandria from Egypt, an Egyptian port. Egypt supplied Italy with grain, and the ship at this season was loaded with wheat. All right? Again, showing the validity. If it said here that the ship was full of tobacco, do you see a problem with that? Tobacco would not become around until the 1600s, when they came to North America and discovered tobacco. So if you put something like that in, oh no, that's not true. So all of these things attribute to the validity of what we are reading. Now, after some more difficult sailing, they arrived at Fair Havens, the city of Fair Havens. This was on the southwest part of the island of Crete. Now, because the winds were against them, they'd already lost a lot of time because of storms. And in this part of the world, navigation was unsafe from November to March. Now, we can identify with that in Maine, right? In Maine, if you're planning a trip to, let's say you want to go to northern Maine to visit someone from November to March, there's a possibility you could run into some storms, okay? The roads might not be the best, all right? Now, in this passage of Scripture, when he's talking about the fast is a term, refers to the Day of Atonement. They would fast for a certain period of time, and so when he talks and says to them that they, in verse number 9, sailing had already become dangerous because it was now after the fast or after the Day of Atonement. And these places and these events sometimes, this places this after September, verse number 9, just to give us an idea. And it attributes to the validity of what we are reading. Now, Paul warned them, men, verse 10, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo, and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This is the harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. Paul said you're going to lose, it's going to be a great loss. But centurion said no, and the captain and the owner, oh, let's go. Paul was overruled, and they left Fair Havens. They wanted to go farther up the coast to Phoenix, which is a better place to spend the winter, verse number 12. Now, verses 13 to 26, this was a costly mistake. Have you ever made a costly mistake in your life? Anybody? You ever made a costly mistake? You know? I've made a few. Looking backwards, I was thinking the other day, you know, if I could have done it over, there probably are a few cars I wouldn't have bought. They were trouble. okay? I might not have sold what I had because I jumped out of the frying pan and right into the fire. So look at verse number 13. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the nor'easter. The nor'easter must have left New England. It got lost because that's what we have down here, right? And swept down from the island. And it happens out on the ocean. The storms come up fast. Did anybody, the other night, night before last, so it was that Friday night? We had an awful storm. Did anybody know we had an awful storm on Friday night? No? Did you sleep right through it? My little dog didn't sleep through it, let me tell you. She's a little chihuahua, and I thought she was going to shake her eyeballs right out of her head. She was just, when she's nervous like that, she sleeps, she has her own beds, plural, and she's climbing up on the side of our bed. Can I get in bed with you? So she spent the rest of the night beside me, leaning right up against me and shivering, okay? And Beth woke me up. I was sleeping through it. Beth woke me up and she said, there's a storm. And Maya's scared. And just about that time, the air in our whole bedroom lit up like there was a white bomb went off. I mean, I could have read a newspaper in the middle of the night in our room and just, and oh boy, So it happens that fast. A powerful wind blew them out to sea. It's not what you want. You don't want to go that way. Sailing by the island of Claudia, about 20 miles southwest of Crete, they decided to lift the lifeboat before it was lost or destroyed. Okay? You might need that lifeboat sometime. Now, it was difficult. Again, all these little details that Paul is talking about, you say, what does this matter? Well, again, it points to that there were very real lives and things that they had to go through. So lifting that lifeboat was probably full of water by the storm. It was so bad in verse number 17, they took ropes and they ran the ropes around the hull of the ship to keep the ship from breaking apart. And they lowered the anchor to stay away from the quicksands of Syrtis off the northeast coast of Africa. They did not want to run ground. Yes? That's a good question. The ship is moving, right? Okay, it's going like this here. So what you do is you take the length of rope, and on either side of the ship, you let it down over the front of the ship, and guess what the ship does? The ship drives over the rope. Okay? And then you tie it off, and you do it again and again and again. And now you have to be very careful so that the rope doesn't get caught up in the propeller. These ships didn't have propellers, right? Okay, the next day the anchor wasn't helping much. Now in all of let's take this. The next day they began to throw the cargo into the sea in verse number 18. They were afraid they were going to take on so much water that they would sink. Lighten the load, and they would have better control. The next day, they threw overboard anything unnecessary for survival. Any of their gear, anything they didn't need, it began to go overboard. Question number 8. Turn the page. Verse number 20. Luke records the utter hopelessness of those aboard the ship. Their hopes were being dashed like the wind. For days, they could not see the sun or the stars to navigate. It means they didn't know which way they were going. They were utterly lost. Paul offered the hope they so badly needed in verses 21 and 22. Okay, after they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves the damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island.'" So he reminded them that they ignored his advice. The people in charge probably already knew that, right? They almost said, "Tell us something we don't know." However, he assured them they would all be safe. Now, that was a hard thing for Paul to tell them. Okay? The ship's going to be lost. You're not going to make a dime on this. In fact, the owner's going to lose the ship. It's going to be lost. But all their lives would be safe. And God sent an angel to assure Paul that he would appear before Caesar. Now, 14 days after leaving Fair Havens, they sensed land in verse number 27. They took measures and dropped the rear anchors to slow them down. They were going too fast. Now, it says that the crew tried to secretly escape in the lifeboat. Mutiny on the Bounty. The crew is they're gonna save themselves. They're gonna get away. Now, you think about it, this great big ship is being tossed like a cork. What's going to happen to that little tiny lifeboat? It's going to capsize in a heartbeat. Now, the soldiers listened to Paul, and they cut loose the lifeboat. Paul told them, everybody's going to be safe, but everybody has to stay with the ship. So they listened to Paul. They had not eaten regularly because the seas were so bad, and I'm not sure how much they could eat. You know, being tossed around like that. My stomach, I don't like roller coasters and those kind of rides. Some people love those kind of things. I'll go on them to go with my grandkids. Went on one with my kids. Take lots of Dramamine. Do it, okay? Just so they can experience it. They didn't have that back then. They hadn't eaten, trying to keep everything afloat, and Paul urged them to eat for the upcoming shipwreck. So eat, that's good advice. Now, they tried to run aground, but they got hung up in a way that the ship broke up. Trying to go right in like this here and run the ship aground, then they get off safely. Nope. It got sideways and the wind just threw them on the rocks and broke the ship. Now, the soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners, but Julius intervened. You remember in that day and age, What happened if a prisoner escaped? The guards, okay? So the guards would have, the soldiers would have been killed. Even if one, let's say they've got 20 prisoners. If one of those prisoners escaped, but they caught the rest of them, kept the rest of them, the guards would all be executed. And so the soldiers, instead of taking a chance, okay, we're going to kill the prisoners. And Paul intervened, and Julius intervened because of Paul. Now in chapter 28, we're moving on, everyone on the ship made it to shore safely. They found some pieces of the ship to hold on to and floated to shore. They must have been terrified. It must have been just horrible. Now, they were on the island of Malta, verse number 1, chapter 28. Now, once it was called Melita from the Greek word honey. So guess what they produced on this island? Honey. You are so smart. The islanders welcomed Paul and Silas, Paul and those with him. They built a fire to comfort them in the rain and cold, verse number 2. So Paul was doing his part to help them build a fire and gathering sticks for the fire and throwing them in. And as he throws a bunch of sticks into the fire, a viper came out of the fire and latched its hand onto Paul. In verse number 4, when the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "Ah, this man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live." And so they thought that he was, his fate, he was going to die. And Paul, these people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds. Instead, they said he was a god. Okay? Paul may have survived the shipwreck, but the islanders believed he would die by snake bite, proving he was a murderer. Now they reconsidered, thinking he was when he didn't die. They thought at first he was under judgment or fate. Now they thought he was a god. Now Paul could not let them continue to think that. And there was a man on the island, Publius, that was there. And miracles continued when Paul, Luke, and the others were taken in by Publius. Now his father was very sick with fever and dysentery. Paul prayed and healed him by the power of Jesus. And as a result of this, the islanders, the people on the island, they just loved Paul and his company. They just fell in love with him, and many miracles happened through the hand of Paul. Now they had to wait 3 months. Remember, this is winter. Not a lot of ships. Their ships shouldn't have even been out there. Okay? And so they had to wait 3 months to continue. As they left, the islanders there gave them gifts of gratitude. They were so thankful for the visit or the shipwreck. The travelers rested up from their shipwreck ordeal. Imagine what that would have taken out of them. And eventually, they made it to Rome. And while he was in Rome, friends continued to give them, and even before they got there, remember, Paul had been on 3 missionary journeys okay? And so the little cities and towns that the ships landed in, Luke and Aristarchus, they would go and they would find the people that Paul had won to the Lord in previous years, and they came, and some of them, they came to the ship. Other times Paul would go to their house. In fact, when they learned that Paul was on his way from the ship to Rome, some of the visitors, some of the disciples, they came 40 miles to make the last, to come with Paul that last 40 miles. And again, he was able to rent a house for 2 years and preach the gospel. And while he was during those 2 years, many of the guards came to the Lord. Many other people came to the Lord during this period of while he was under house arrest. Amen. Well, that is our lesson today, and Robert will pass out our lesson for next week.